I want you to imagine two people. The first is you, as you currently are. The second is also you, only with one difference. You've become really good with words. Now I'm guessing that this second version of you, the one that's become really good with words, will be a lot better at school, if you're a student, at work, if you have a job, and also at connecting with people, whether on social media, through text messages, or even while doing something I encourage all of you to do by the end of the course. Craft a handwritten letter to someone you care about. And I certainly think this second version of you will be a lot better at perhaps the most common form of writing most of us do these days, which is email. Just imagine what it would mean if you became 10 or 20 or perhaps 50% better at email and all of the other writing you do. Think of the impact it would have on your career prospects, your relationships, your capacity to express yourself clearly and compellingly. My guess is that the impact would be pretty big, which is why we put together this MOOC. It's based on a course and workshop I have taught at the University of Michigan Law School, the University of Chicago Law School, and several law firms, government agencies, and nonprofit organizations. But the materials have also been used by plenty of people outside of the legal profession. Here's just a partial list of the fields that folks who have taken the Michigan version of the course are pursuing: consulting, banking, medicine, social work, education, public policy, engineering, philosophy, design, music, data science, economics. And while I'll be focusing on how to become good with words in English, I'm told by the many international students and professionals I get to work with that these lessons are particularly useful for non-English speakers, not just because they help you understand how to write better in English, but also because they contain principles that can improve the way you write in other languages as well. I've heard this from students of mine who grew up in China, Japan, Brazil, Germany, India, Ghana, Iran, Spain, Mexico, and many other countries. It's actually kind of hard for me to think of a place or profession where it wouldn't help to be good with words. So, let's get started. I mentioned in the first video that this MOOC started as an actual course. And part of what makes it unique is that you'll get a chance to experience that course. You'll get to read the book the students read. You'll get to do the exercises the students did. And best of all, you'll get to sit in on class discussions, thanks to a collection of videos Brian Genoa, a media specialist at Michigan Law, has assembled. The hope is that these videos will help make this course more lively and interactive, that they will give you a chance to participate in a kind of back and forth dialogue that, when done well, really enhances learning. So I encourage you to talk back to the screen a little bit when you hear me ask a question, or just jot down some possible answers. See how your responses compare to what the students say. Test whether you're following along. Then maybe use the discussion board to add something that was left out of the conversation. You certainly don't have to do any of these things. There are many ways to engage with the course, and I definitely understand that some people may consume parts of it while commuting or taking a walk or doing the dishes. But we did want to at least give you the option to get a little more involved, beginning with a couple of classroom exchanges about the sometimes misunderstood relationship between being smart and being a good writer, as well as one about a key aim of this course: making you more persuasive. We've also included some optional videos. As I said before, there are a variety of approaches you can take to this course. The optional material is for those of you who have the time and interest to delve a little deeper. Writing is one of those wonderful skills and subjects about which there's always more to learn. We want to give you the chance to consume as much of it as you find useful.
From NPR News in Washington, I'm Louise Schiavone. A nuclear engineer from the U.S. Navy and his wife were arrested this weekend on espionage charges. The Justice Department says Jonathan Twebby tried to sell secrets about submarines to a foreign entity. According to court records unsealed today, the representative of the supposed foreign entity turned out to be an FBI agent. Can American children safely enjoy the Halloween ritual of trick-or-treating this month? The nation's chief infectious disease expert says a cautious yes. Dr. Anthony Fauci spoke on CNN's State of the Union.
I think that particularly if you're vaccinated, but you can get out there, you're outdoors for the most part, at least when my children were out there doing trick-or-treating, and enjoy it. I mean, this is a time that children love. It's a very important part of the year for children. I know my children enjoyed it. So, I mean, again, particularly if you're vaccinated. If you're not vaccinated, again, think about it.
Fauci says this is a good opportunity for parents to rethink getting vaccinated against COVID-19 to add an extra layer of family protection. Alabama Governor Kay Ivey is extending a state of emergency order designed to help hospitals swamped with COVID patients. Pat Duggins of Alabama Public Radio has more.
Alabama hospitals are still struggling to maintain enough staff to handle its COVID-19 caseload, despite dropping below 1,000 patients. That's the first time the state's coronavirus burden has been that low since July. Governor Kay Ivey's order to extend a state of emergency until the end of the month is meant to ease regulations allowing out-of-state doctors, nurses, and pharmacists to work in Alabama hospitals. The state's health department recently said Alabama had more COVID deaths than live births. Most of the people occupying hospital beds are unvaccinated. For NPR News, I'm Pat Duggins in Tuscaloosa, Alabama.
Tsai Ing-wen, the leader of Taiwan, says the island wants to maintain its political status quo with China, which seeks to control Taiwan. But Taiwan will also stand up to Beijing's increased military pressures. NPR's Emily Feng reports her comments come after a week of record Chinese fighter plane patrols near Taiwan.
The island of Taiwan is celebrating its National Day of sorts, a holiday also celebrated in mainland China for marking the end of imperial rule. Taiwan marked the occasion with a rare display of military hardware, parading missile launchers and flying fighter jets across the capital, a visual display of defiance after Beijing sent more than 150 fighter jets flying into airspace monitored by Taiwan's defense forces last weekend. President Tsai Ing-wen struck a balanced tone in her commemorative address, but vowed that, quote, "we will do our utmost to prevent the status quo from being unilaterally altered." Emily Feng, NPR News, Beijing.
Former Army Chief of Staff Ray Ordiano died this weekend from cancer. He was 67. He led U.S. forces in Iraq. This is NPR. Britain will go into the United Nations Biodiversity Conference in China tomorrow with a record in need of improvement. The latest Global Biodiversity Intactness Index shows it in the bottom 10%, dead last among the G7 nations. But as Vicky Barker reports from London, a British royal is on the case.
Prince William has said he wants to be able to look his children in the eye and say he did his bit when it really mattered. So his Earthshot Prize, to be awarded later this week, will give 5 projects aimed at restoring the planet £1 million each. That's about $1.4 million.
Vicky Barker in London. The president of the Czech Republic today was rushed into intensive care as he was supposed to lead political negotiations about forming a new government. NPR's Rob Schmitz reports.
The Central Military Hospital in Prague says President Miloš Zeman was admitted to an intensive care unit due to complications of an undisclosed chronic condition. The 77-year-old is in charge of leading talks with party leaders after national elections on Friday and Saturday, and he was rushed to an ambulance after he met with the Prime Minister Andrej Babiš, whose centrist party narrowly lost the election to a center-right party and appears to have no chance of forming a ruling majority. Under the Czech constitution, the president can appoint anyone as prime minister and instruct them to nominate a cabinet. But if Zeman is incapacitated, this authority passes to the Speaker of the lower house. Zeman spent 8 days in a hospital last month. Rob Schmitz, NPR News, Berlin.
I'm Louise Schiavone, NPR News, Washington.
One way to grasp the importance of being good with words is to think about a time when not being good with words really hurt you. Maybe you turned in a poorly written paper or business report. Maybe you didn't get a grant you applied for, or you found out an ad and other marketing materials you put together didn't quite connect with customers the way you wanted them to. Maybe you even got passed over for a job. There was an article in the Harvard Business Review a number of years ago on this last point. Here's the headline: I will not hire people who use poor grammar. The author runs 2 companies, and he says, look, bad writing is unprofessional. Bad writing is distracting. Bad writing shows that you don't care enough to learn what good writing is, and that you might not be somebody who pays attention to details. So part of this course is designed to help you reduce the errors that may be getting in the way of your academic and professional development. But reducing errors is not the only way to improve. We'll also make sure we increase our insights. I take this idea of errors and insights from the psychologist Gary Klein and his book, Seeing What Others Don't. He considers both a necessary part of improvement. Reducing errors will only get us so far, Klein says. To really excel, we also need to learn how to up our insights. We need to generate and absorb new strategies for approaching whatever it is we want to improve. To help with that, your first assignment will give you the chance to borrow insights from a host of excellent writers. These include the British novelist and essayist Zadie Smith, the Argentine master of short stories Jorge Luis Borges, the American judge Richard Posner, as well as folks like Susan Sontag, Isabel Allende, and ZZ Packer. As the MOOC progresses, we'll also be returning to Gary Klein and other researchers who study the psychology of decision-making, because that is what good writing involves: consistently making good decisions. Decisions about words, decisions about structure, and decisions about the different aims of drafting and editing. These 4 topics are how this specialization will be arranged. We are going to have separate courses on each. There'll be one on words, there'll be one on structure, there'll be one on drafting, and there'll be one on editing. We're also going to work on, throughout each of these sections, one of the most important skills you can develop as a writer: time management. Of all the phrases that you could have associated with your name, here's one you definitely don't want: Mrs. Deadlines. So beginning with the errors and insights assignment, let's really start to examine our own habits, both good and bad, when it comes to finishing projects on time. People who can regularly produce high-quality work on schedule add a lot of value in schools, in companies, and in the wider community. Let's try to be one of those people. Now that you've had a chance to do the Errors and Insights assignment, I want to introduce an additional pair of terms that will be helpful to us as we try to improve as writers and advocates: mechanics and strategy. Writing, I tell my students, is about those two things. It's about mechanics, which you might think of as the how of a sentence, paragraph, clause, or phrase. And it is about strategy, which you can think of as the why of a sentence, paragraph, clause, or phrase. Importantly, the two go together. The better your mechanics are as a writer, the more advanced will be the strategies you're able to implement. And the more clearly you can identify your strategy for a particular piece of writing, the easier it will be to figure out the mechanics necessary to implement it. We'll be using these terms throughout the MOOC. They can even help outline how the course is designed to operate. The mechanics, or how, of the course are going to involve a lot of opportunities to do short writing assignments, thanks to a bunch of tools created by the academic innovation team at Michigan. The strategy driving these assignments comes from an interesting place: a math professor at the University of Florida named Bruce Edwards. Explaining why it is so important to actually do calculus problems when you're trying to learn calculus, rather than just listen to someone talk through the concepts, Edwards says that learning often starts in your hand, travels up your arm, and only then lands in your brain. I think writing works the same way. I also think there's something magical and at times transformative about writing things down on a piece of paper, or, if you prefer, typing them out on a computer. James Pennebaker of the University of Texas talks about this a lot in his books and articles on expressive writing, as does Sean Bielek, a psychologist who ran the Human Performance Lab at the University of Chicago before becoming president of Barnard University in New York. In her 2011 book, Choke, Bielek discusses several studies that show how powerful and often calming writing can be when preparing for high-pressure situations. We've included links to pieces by both Pennebaker and Bielek in this week's materials. I encourage you to check them out. Each supports a nice bit of advice the Dominican-American writer Julia Alvarez received from her grandma during a time when Alvarez, who grew up under the dictatorship of Rafael Trujillo, was really struggling. El papel aguanta todo, which she translates as, the paper can hold everything. Fears, regrets, anxieties, ambitions, even trauma. For our purposes, all it needs to hold is a record of your learning and development. But I hope that one of the benefits of this course is that even after it finishes, you treat writing not just as a way to communicate with other people, but also as a way to process and sort through difficult problems. You might even keep in mind an observation made by people as different as the novelist Don DeLillo and the Harvard business professor Clayton Christensen, who is famous for, among other things, the theory of disruptive innovation. Both have highlighted the way writing can be a form of discovery and problem solving. Here's how DeLillo put it in an interview with the Paris Review in 1993. I don't know what I think about certain subjects, even today, until I sit down and try to write about them. And here's what Christensen offers in his 2008 book, Disrupting Class: How Disruptive Innovation Will Change the Way the World Learns, which he co-wrote with Michael Horn and Curtis Johnson. I never know how little I know about a subject until I try to write cogently about it. So take advantage of the time and tools this course gives you to put your thoughts into written words. You'll likely learn a lot, not just about writing, but about other subjects as well, including yourself. This course is called Good with Words, but its initial goal is to at least make you better with words. It also has a broader goal. I really hope the materials help you get better at getting better. I hope they help you improve how you improve. You can think of this as essentially learning to increase your rate of return. One way to do that is to take some lessons from the book Peak by the psychologist Anders Ericsson and the mathematician and science journalist Robert Poole. Ericsson is often called the expert on experts because he has spent decades studying top performers in music, sports, and many other fields. If you ever heard of the 10,000-hour rule, he is the guy whose research led to its popularization. Though he's often said, including in his book, that 10,000 hours is a misleading simplification of his findings. The real key is not how long you practice, but how you practice. Here's how he puts the point in Peak. The right sort of practice carried out over a sufficient period of time leads to improvement. Nothing else. The term he uses to describe this right sort of practice is deliberate practice. Here are some of its key elements. Deliberate practice develops skills that other people have already figured out how to do and for which effective training techniques have been established. Fortunately, writing is one of those skills we have already figured out. We are not the first ones to try to get better at it. There are tons of effective training techniques we can learn from and try. A second element of deliberate practice is the practice regimen should be designed and overseen by a teacher or coach who is familiar with the abilities of expert performers. Again, we got that covered. That's why I'm here. You can think of me as your teacher or coach, although I certainly encourage you to also use each other as resources, particularly when it comes to getting feedback on your writing, as well as ideas about helpful techniques and strategies to try. Now we come to a third and somewhat more difficult element of deliberate practice, but I hope many of you embrace it. Deliberate practice takes place outside one's comfort zone and requires a student to constantly try things that are just beyond their current abilities. Thus, it demands near maximal effort, which is generally not enjoyable. This is going to be the big question mark for how much you improve during this course, and also in the weeks, months, and years that follow. If you're willing to push yourself, if you're willing to travel outside of your comfort zone and consistently give near maximal effort, you're likely going to improve a lot. But even if you don't have that bandwidth at the moment, because you are pressed for time and have other obligations, I hope you do keep in mind Ericsson's idea that just practicing isn't enough. You really want to be intentional, or as he says, deliberate, about the steps you are taking and whether there's evidence to support their effectiveness. We talked in the last video about the book Peak by Anders Ericsson and Robert Poole. We focused in particular on this idea of deliberate practice. I don't want to overstate the importance of it, however, especially given that research done by Brooke McNamara, David Ambrock, and Frederick Oswald has found that plenty of other factors play a role in the development of expertise. But among the features of deliberate practice that I think will be useful to us is one that is built into the self-assessment exercise you have coming up: setting clear goals. Specifically, we'll be using what are called SMART goals. Companies as different as GE, Toyota, and Coca-Cola have all at some point adopted SMART goals, which are goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely, meaning there's a particular endpoint or deadline. Perhaps your SMART goal will be mastering commas by the end of this MOOC. Perhaps it will be creating regular times to read your writing out loud before handing it in. I don't really care what you pick. My only wish is that you use your SMART goal to add some focus and accountability to how you approach becoming a better writer. At the same time, there's also a place in your self-assessment to be a little more bold and ambitious. This is an opportunity to create a stretch goal, which, as you'll learn in the assignment, involves radical expectations that go beyond current capabilities and performance. An example my students like to pick is publishing an op-ed. But maybe yours will be starting a blog, finishing a book, or using your writing to help land your dream job. Even if you don't reach your stretch goal, and you'll definitely want to make it hard enough for success not to be guaranteed, striving for it can lead to some beneficial outcomes and discoveries. You might think of it like the way Google thinks about its moonshot projects, even creating a whole separate entity to pursue things like self-driving cars, renewable energy, and delivering internet access to some of the poorest, most remote places on the planet. Or you can think of it through what the prize-winning neuroscientist Solomon Snyder calls the audacity principle, which he defines as being sufficiently courageous to ask important questions. In either case, it's helpful to remember that it often takes a little courage and a lot of imagination to achieve great things, particularly when it comes to writing.